So if you're wanting to start a business and you're struggling to figure out the right legal structure for that business, how do you decide which one makes the most sense for you? Well, there's no correct answer for everyone. There's no one size fits all. It very much depends on your region, your industry, your goals, your personal situation, future growth projections and things like that. But in this video, I'm just going to address some of those different legal structures and when it might make sense to go with those compared to other ones. So just to start with, this video is just for general education purposes. In order for me to give advice, I need to work one-on-one with a client, and it really does depend on many different factors, including the jurisdiction in which you're located. So the legal structures that I'm going to cover today would be the most basic and most common ones: the sole proprietor, the partnership, the corporation, and the cooperative. There are other ones like LLP, which is limited liability partnership, and LLC, which is limited liability company, and then PC, which is professional corporation. But these don't exist in every jurisdiction. It really depends where you live. And for LLPs, typically those are reserved for certain professions like lawyers and accountants. For LLCs, those don't exist in Canada. Those are in the US. And then for professional corporations, those are also limited to certain professions. So for most businesses, it's going to be one of the four: the sole prop, the partnership, the business corporation, or the cooperative, like I mentioned. But maybe even before looking into the different legal structures, the most important question is how many owners are there going to be? Because if there's going to be more than one owner, then you're a little bit restricted with which legal structure you can choose. But so for the first one, the sole proprietor, that's really common, and actually that's the easiest to set up and maintain and the cheapest to set up and maintain. So if that's a goal of yours, just to have something that's simple and cheap and easy to set up and maintain, then sole proprietorship might be a good idea for you, but that is only for one owner. You can't have a sole proprietorship with multiple owners. So for the sole proprietor or sole proprietorship, I think it makes sense when it's just one individual. They're not planning on having other owners, and they're basically trying to create just a career for themselves. They're not really trying to acquire a bunch of equipment or a bunch of employees, and they're probably not even going to be generating tons of income. Again, maybe it's just an individual who's just kind of creating a profession and a career for themselves. But it's still possible to have a bunch of employees, to own equipment, and to generate a lot of revenue as a sole proprietorship. But you have some limited options when it comes to things like taxes. Now, the second one, the partnership, this can make a lot of sense as well, although it is less common. I generally don't recommend it. But a partnership is a lot like a sole proprietorship, where there's not a legal separation like a corporation. It's very much tied to the human entities. But a partnership is when you have more than one owner. And so that is the biggest difference between a partnership and a sole proprietorship, is that it's multiple owners. So if it's going to be you and two other people or four other people, then partnership could make sense. But the reason I don't generally recommend it is because then the business is so tied to those human individuals, and your relationship is really important. Because if you start with one other individual or two other individuals and one or both of them leave, then there's no more partnership. So you kind of have to tear down the business and rebuild it as a sole proprietorship. And your clients and customers might not even see that, but from the back end, there's a lot of administrative work to kind of restructure the business as a sole proprietorship. So if you are going into a partnership with someone, it's a good idea that you have a good relationship with them and you know that this is going to be, a long-standing business relationship. I recently had an initial consultation with an individual who wanted to start a partnership. And again, usually I don't recommend it, but in this case, he was wanting to start one with his daughter and his wife, so people he had very long-term relationships with. And the business was mostly about him. He kind of just wanted his wife and daughter to be part owners because of their expertise, and they're going to be more like consultants for the business and not so much operating it. So, because of that long-term relationship and because of the fact that it's mostly going to be him operating it, there's less opportunity for conflict and things that could damage the relationship outside of the business. Now, the next legal structure, and this one is really common too, definitely more common than a partnership, would be a corporation. And a corporation is quite a bit different than the other two because it's a separate legal entity. When you incorporate a business, you're almost creating a new human. It's a separate legal body. So this separate legal body has its own tax rate, it has its own tax return, it has its own bank account, and things like that. Now, the corporation is more work to set up and maintain, and it's more money to set up and maintain, which is, I guess, a bad thing, but in some cases, it still makes a lot of sense to incorporate because of the extra benefits. A couple of the main benefits would just be more flexibility with taxes, because the income and the expenses of the corporation are not yours personally. They can stay in the corporation and just pay a corporate tax rate, or you can make yourself an employee. You can pay yourself owner dividends. You can pay yourself just as an independent contractor. You can loan money to the corporation and the corporation can pay you back. So there's a little bit more optionality there in terms of, financial strategy and tax strategy. And then lastly would be the cooperative, which isn't talked about very much, but a cooperative is actually a form of corporation. It's that separate legal entity, but it's treated a little bit differently than a regular business corporation. Now, one of the biggest differences between a cooperative and a business corporation is that with a cooperative, there's no shareholders or owners, there's members. And so everyone that's a registered member has equal say in the operations and decisions of the business. Whereas with a corporation, you have shareholders. So you could have one person that owns 51% of the shares and another person who owns 49. And so you have a majority shareholder, who gets final say on the decisions of the business. Whereas with a cooperative, it's more democratic where everyone has equal say. Now, a cooperative can make a lot of sense in the right situation. It's basically designed for people, individuals, even businesses coming together with a common goal to achieve something. So I'll give you a couple examples of where a cooperative could make sense. Let's say you are a massage therapist or another type of healthcare practitioner, and you want to lease out a space, but it's too expensive just to have your own space, but you don't really want like business partners or employees. What you could do is find other independent healthcare practitioners that are in similar fields, and you could come together and form a cooperative to lease a facility and pay for the insurance and maybe pay for like an admin person, an online booking software and a website and things like that, where you're chipping in together to pay for those common costs, but you're still operating very independently and you don't really have to know how much the other person's charging or generating or getting involved with their clients or anything like that. You're still very independent. This could also work for something like if you are a small producer of goods or homemade foods or something like that, where you want to rent a retail space, but you just don't have the volume of sales or enough products or even the capacity to produce enough to pay for a space in a central area. Then you could form a cooperative with other people that are selling similar goods and just come together in one retail space together, where again, you're kind of operating independently, but you're coming together to share those common costs. Now, some other options for cooperatives would be if you are producing something or wanting to purchase something. Let's say you have a small farm and you can't produce enough to get a contract with a big retailer. Well, you could form a cooperative with other small farmers and then bring your crops together or your supplies together to create, more volume so that maybe you can get a contract with like a bigger grocery store or retailer, because now you have enough volume where again, you're still operating independently, but you are working with other people through a cooperative to supply enough volume to make those sales. And then in the case of purchasing something, let's say you need to purchase some type of supply or equipment for your business, but you just can't afford it, or maybe you can't order enough for the supplier to be willing to sell to you. In that case, you could form a cooperative with other similar businesses that need the same equipment or supplies, come together, and then you have more purchasing power. And so you're still operating your businesses very independently, but you're coming together for that purpose of, bulk orders to get better prices or to be able to work with a supplier. So that's just a brief introduction to cooperatives and the other legal structures. Hopefully this was helpful. I know that it is complicated and it depends a lot, but I just wanted to provide some general education on the topic of legal structures. So hopefully the video was useful. If so, please click like and subscribe to my YouTube channel here, where I currently have approximately 250 videos that cover business management and business startup topics.